So thank you all so much for joining us here today. We are going to dive in and look over what it means to be a proctor for one of NHA's exams, as well as some key things to know before running a test on site at your location. We'll review all of the resources and tools that you have available to you to make sure that your exam day for both you and your learners is a successful one. We will cover all of these topics listed here today. So if you again have questions, please post them in that Q&A box so we can try to get to all of them. If we can't, follow up with you, we'll follow up with you afterwards, but stick with us all the way through to the end. Now, before we get into some information, I wanted to take a minute just to find out a little bit more about the people that we have here with us today. So I'm going to post a poll here. Just a quick question. What type of program are you associated with? Select the one that most closely aligns to kind of where you're coming from. If you choose other, go ahead and post that in the chat box. We're just trying to see kind of who's with us today and what, your general institution type is like. So just take a quick minute, read through those options, select the option that works most closely with what your experience is. Give you just a minute to read through all of those. Okay, we got about half of you. Anybody else wanna post our ante in there so we can see where we're coming from? Almost there. Give you guys one more second. Excellent. All right, we're going to go ahead and close that down. So it looks like we have a healthy range here of people from all over, but primarily those working in a workforce program with frequent exam dates is what this looks like. So thank you all so much for answering that. I got one more question for you. What is your personal familiarity with proctoring one of NHA's exams? Just pick the one that kind of most closely aligns to your history or experience. Gives me a little bit more information as we're going through about some things we might need to cover. Okay, got almost all of you in there. Anybody else want to ante in before we close that up? Okay, let's go ahead and close that. Perfect. Thank you all. Okay, so it looks like about 2/3 of you, this is a brand new thing. So excellent. Thank you for joining us. We'll have a lot of great information, hopefully to help you feel more comfortable as you move through to your exam days. But the other third, it's like a medium experience. So great. Again, thank you all so much for sharing that with us so that we can kind of get to know you a little bit better. So just to level set real quick and relay that the only NHA resources that require a proctored exam are the 8 nationally accredited certification tests that are available for candidates. Of these 8, the only one that cannot be run on site at your location is the pharmacy technician exam. The Board of Pharmacy requires that this exam be run through a third-party testing agency. So it's possible that your location may already be or have an approved third-party testing site or testing location on site. If that's something that your location wants to do or become, that is something that you'd need to address directly with our third-party testing vendor, PSI. So the material we're covering today is not related to third-party testing with PSI. We are hosting another webinar this week around that. Today is about on-site testing alone. Just for a little bit of background on that, PSI is our selected third-party resource who we've partnered with for the last decade. So for candidates who are testing, again, for pharmacy technician, or who may need to test remotely or off-site. They will use this resource, the PSI testing process, to schedule and take those exams. Proctoring exams on site at your institution does not make you a PSI proctor, nor do you schedule PSI tests. But as an employee of your institution or school, you have the option to proctor exams live on campus, and that's what we're focused on today. Okay, so the first step to proctoring one of NHA's exams is becoming a proctor. But not everyone can or should proctor a high stakes exam. NHA's Proctor Handbook, which is available on our website, covers the basics of who should or shouldn't proctor, what it means to proctor, and making sure that everything is ready for exam day. This is a really important document to understand what proctoring is and the security measures around the process. So, for any of your questions like what to do if a candidate is caught cheating or what needs to be physically in the testing space, this is your first place to go and check. The Proctor Handbook will walk you through who should and shouldn't proctor, as I said, what it means to have a conflict of interest, which is the legal way to say that you have too much stake in the outcome of the exam. So, people who can proctor, as long as they are over 18, are those in other departments, or if you have a dedicated testing center already, or a technology center, or an employee from any of those, or even an administrative assistant or librarian, for example. Now, conflict of interest means no one who is in the classroom with the learners or even program administrators, directors, owners, anyone who has a lot of direct contact with the student, maybe just a little too involved or have a little too high investment in programmatic success. These people should not be in the testing room during an exam. Take note also of some of the other pieces for proctoring, such as the proctor to student ratio, who can or can't test on site, and when you might not be eligible to proctor due to maybe preparing for the exam yourself as an administrator or instructor. So we've got resources for you too, if that's the case, but that's not, we could talk about that if you have questions. So to become a proctor, you first need to be invited to your NHA account from an existing administrator on that account. You'll receive an email to log in for the first time where you can update your details. You'll remember, make sure they're one that you'll remember the password you set. This is important because you will use this login on exam day. From there, you can complete the proctor training, which should only be about 15 to 20 minutes of your time, but does walk you through all the steps, ethical requirements you may need. This should be completed as soon as you can, ideally at least 30 days before the scheduled exam date, but no later than 10 days before. So you have enough time to familiarize yourself with your tools and ensure the testing space will be ready on exam day. So when you first log in at nhanow.com, after you've established your password and contact information, you can see the prompt to become a proctor here. This training will need to be renewed annually, but only if you are still proctoring. You'll receive a reminder to renew, usually about 3 months before it expires. And when the time is right, just log in and you can click on that link and refresh that training. But if you're no longer responsible to proctor, ignore that. Only complete the training the next year if you are still required in this role. Okay, so what do proctors even do? Well, you would be responsible to prepare the exam room, print off rosters, confirm student identities to that roster, ensuring their names match what is on their government issued photo ID, and most importantly, monitor the students for the duration of the exam. If there are any issues or irregularities, which could include an instance of cheating, or even if the power goes out during a test, you are the one responsible to submit an incident form so that NHA can address anything that we may need, from withdrawing a certification to resetting an exam availability for a candidate. You will not be proctoring remote exams. Learners can't take an exam with you via Zoom or through any online format. As I mentioned earlier, NHA uses PSI for any remote tests. So please do not attempt to proctor if the candidates aren't live with you in the testing space. You also don't have the authority to extend test times or provide any additional accommodations without NHA's advance approval. We'll cover that a little bit more in a minute. But if a student or a candidate needs to submit a request for accommodation because of an IEP or 504 on file, that is their responsibility to do at least a month before the exam date. You must stay in the room during the test for the duration of that exam unless there's an alternative proctor there to relieve you. Exam dates need to be created in advance, and learners should have their applications done no later than the week before the test. No, don't worry, we're going to walk through this in a little bit more in a minute. You are also not responsible to register candidates for their exams. That's something they need to do. During the application process, a candidate signs a legal form called an attestation. This confirms their identity, their ethical responsibility, and eligibility to test. Again, this should happen no later than the week before the exam. And hopefully, this one makes sense. You should not answer student questions on the exam content, right? Don't do that. That's kind of the biggest piece there. Okay, so what's allowed in an exam room? Well, each candidate can bring or can have, pardon me, 2 sheets of blank paper. Now, this is something that you must provide and collect at the end of the exam. So the paper is something that you would provide to them, also collect at the end. They can also have 2 number 2 pencils, which they can bring. They can't have any other resources in the exam room except for the billing and coding exam. That's a certified billing and coding specialist test. So those students are required to bring their 3 coding manuals into the exam room. These can have personal notes written in them, as well as tabs on the pages, but cannot be an ebook or include any inserted pages. These would need to be removed prior to the start of the exam. Other items not allowed would include personal items like a cell phone, a coat, a purse, but exceptions should be made for any religious clothing. In addition, there is no food or drink allowed during the exam unless pre-approved for medical purposes through an accommodation approval. Learners cannot bring in their own calculators. All necessary calculations will have resources available within the exam format. So what's allowed, what's not allowed. Okay, so I want to do a quick question here. I'm just going to post another poll. So of those of you who are here with us, I know this is new for many of you. How many of you have already completed your proctor training? Just take a quick minute after what we've just reviewed and pick the item that is most aligned with where you're at. I'm just kind of curious. All right, got almost everybody. Couple more waiting. Anybody else want to ante in there? Okay, we're going to close it up in just another second. Perfect. So it looks like we have actually a pretty healthy split, though the majority of you have already completed your training. Congratulations. A few of you have not yet, and a couple of you have defined as not eligible, but that's okay. This is important confirmation information for you as well. So that's good to know. Thank you so much for sharing that with me, you guys. All right. So with those of you who have already completed your training, hopefully a lot of what we're about to cover will be review, but let's talk about the resources available to you as a proctor for your program. So once you have completed the proctor training, you will then have access to the proctor manual. It's also called the process guide. This manual is your direct roadmap to the exam process, and it's what you'll use before, during, and after the exam to make sure everything is in order. It is a downloadable PDF that also includes the entire proctor script. It has resource links and information about any testing irregularities and what to do about them. NHA's Help Center is also here for you to cover a variety of needs. So we have our live chat available to you, an 800 number there to answer emergency questions. Though they do run extended hours, they are not 24-hour and are closed on national holidays. So if you have a test coming up on a 3-day weekend, for example, look ahead to make sure everything is set up. This is also where you will locate any incident forms in the Help Center, any technical requirements for the testing computers, as well as additional FAQs. So lots of resources there for you. Now, to help you with all these processes, also through your NHA website, you have access to our how-to library. This includes walkthroughs on becoming or renewing your proctor status, a short video that takes you through the proctoring process, and we also send you reminders through your login email to maintain your proctor training. There are how-tos available for learners as well that include what to do to reschedule their exams, for example, or if they need to test through the third-party agency, PSI. So let's take a look at some of the best practices for a successful exam day. Now that we've established what proctoring is and isn't, we're going to take a look and see what are the best steps for you. So be sure to have a few things ready, like the proctor manual, and also the test plan or plans for the exams you're proctoring. During the test script, if you read in advance, you'll need to inform learners of how long the exam will be and how many questions there will be on the exam. And you will find this information on the exam test plan. Also, be sure to have noted the live chat feature on our website to ensure that in case of an emergency or urgent need, you have instant access to our client care team. Again, our help center will outline their available hours and if they'll be closed for any additional days, as I mentioned earlier, a 3-day weekend or national holiday. One of the key pieces for you is to know when exams are scheduled, as well as how many candidates will be attending. You can do this from your NHA login by selecting the Upcoming Exams button. This will take you to your institution's existing exam calendar. So this calendar will default to a view of just 30 days in advance, but you can stretch that to a 90-day window. This page gives you all the information you need about the upcoming exam, starting with the exam date. This is the date the test will run. So for your candidates, you will see the application deadline. This is the last day that a candidate can apply for the exam. This should be typically the week before the test, technically 8 days before. All applications should be done prior to 11:59 p.m. Central Time on this date so that it closes overnight and is officially closed the week before the exam. You can also see how many candidates are on that roster. So this is important to know how many proctors you may need. The proctor to student ratio should never exceed 25 candidates to a single proctor. You will be able to see what exams may be running at this time, and you'll want to be sure to check the length and question number from those test plans to be sure you provide your learners the correct information. The exam status is also really important. As you can see here, the first test is in a sent status, which is the necessary status for an exam to be live for you to proctor on exam day. If that test doesn't go through the final phase of processing, it will remain in a closed status, as you can see here from the July 29th exam. In this instance, when you show up to proctor, there would not be an available exam for you. Now, this is easy to fix, but much better to discover before test day, especially if you're testing over a weekend or holiday. Keep an eye on this page to make sure that this status transitions from closed to sent. This should happen automatically 3 business days before the exam date. Check your exam statuses within that 3-day window to be sure everything is ready to go. Then before the exam, the roster should be finalized. You will need to have this printed to have documentation of your students or candidates and confirm their information on test day. So you can access this through the View Exam Rosters feature. You want to select the exam date that you need from the drop-down list there. And then you can click on the link in the bottom right-hand corner to print the roster. If for some reason the roster looks wrong, then take note of the existing filter. It's in the upper right-hand corner. If this is set to pending approval, not all learners may be on your list. So be sure to check that this is filtered to approved students so your roster is accurate. On exam day, you'll use this to confirm their names. Remember, they do have to match their government-issued photo ID. Only that candidate can take that exam. If the names don't match, then they are not allowed to test. You may be required to schedule an exam. Now, this feature is not available to everyone. So if you are supposed to also schedule exam dates, but don't see this request new exam option, please connect with your institution to see if your administrative privileges need to be updated. So if you do have this, if that is in your role, selecting this should open your information page. Type in the required exam date, also select the application deadline. The calendar helps you to identify what that 8 days prior to the exam needs to be to make sure everything is set up correctly. And then you want to put in, again, that registration deadline accordingly. You will also have some open fields to complete if you choose. Note that these are optional. The exam details will be any additional details that need to be visible to candidates during the application process. So, for example, if you have two tests running on a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, this could be the start time of the test. It could be the instructor's name for the course, or even what building or classroom that exam needs to be in. Purchase orders aren't used for everyone, but if a purchase order number needs to be on the final invoice, be sure to make sure it's listed now. NHA can't add a PO after an exam is finalized. So if you have that, needs to be there, plop that in right now. Now, the bottom of this page will give you the option to select the exam or exams that run at this time that you've selected. So please know that candidates won't be able to select more than one test at a time. If concurrent exams need to be run, please refer back to the Proctor Handbook to address timeline requirements. This is also important as not all tests run for the same amount of time. Our medical assistant and billing and coding tests, for example, both run 3 hours maximum, whereas other tests may only be 2 hours long. Running multiple exam types that are different timelines can cause an issue if you're the only proctor. Unless another proctor is with you, candidates must all stay in the exam room until the final exam closes. So a candidate whose test is only 2 hours, for example, would be required to wait until the 3-hour test is also completed. Now, if you have a second proctor and can escort students out as they complete the test, that's okay. They would need to collect any scratch paper beforehand. But if it's just you, we want to make sure that we keep those timelines the same. Now, you are not responsible to reschedule missing students. Anyone who misses an exam needs to go through their own account to reschedule that test. Your institution needs to have an open test date available for them to do so, but you cannot change a candidate's registration on their behalf. For on-site exams, there is no additional charge for learners to reschedule. There's no additional cost there. But for any candidates testing off-site through our third-party agency, PSI, they must reschedule their exams at least 24 hours before the scheduled test date, or they may forfeit their exam costs and have to have a secondary payment to reschedule. Now, that again depends on the situation, but primarily that's the best practice. Now, if you have a candidate or candidates who can't remember their personal login passwords at the start of the exam, you will have the option to help them. Now, this is only applicable for on-site exams, not through PSI or remote testing. But if you are actively proctoring, you can help this already very stressful situation. So you'll need to be logged in to the exam as a proctor and select the Generate Password Reset Code feature. At that point, a 12-digit alphanumeric code will appear that you can share with your test takers. This code will expire in 30 minutes. So after that point, a new code would need to be created if there's an additional password issue. Candidates just need to follow the forgot password prompt in this scenario and select the option for during a proctored exam, and then confirm they are in fact in the exam room. They are instructed to let you as the proctor know that this is happening, and then they answer a few verification questions, information from their own account, such as their street address or birth date. And with successful answers, they're then able to enter the access code you have created, which will grant them access to their portal and allow you to begin their exam. You can create this code in advance of the exam start and put it up on a board, for example, for everybody to see, or create only if needed, though applicable for any candidate in the testing space at that time. Remember, the code is only valid for a 30-minute window. So just plan accordingly based off of what you may need. Okay, I wanted to stop here and just see if there were any big questions in the chat or Q&A that we need to address before we move into some other kind of timeline information pieces. Has there been any major questions there yet, team?
No, you did cover how to create an exam, so I think we're doing great.
Wahoo! All right. Thanks so much, Mary. Appreciate that.
You're
Remember
welcome.
to post any questions that you guys may have in that Q&A box. We can be sure to capture that as we move through the rest of today. Okay, so now that we've seen the exam process, let's take a look at the timeline for the test. So we wanted to review everything we've talked about before we get to the most frequently asked questions, which we are going to cover. We'll take kind of major players on our countdown one at a time, knowing that programs do vary in lengths. So your involvement really doesn't start until around 30 days before the exam date. Again, we'll count down each week and take a look at the day before and day of the exam itself. So around this time, 3 to 4 weeks-ish before the test, you should begin or have already completed your proctor training. If you need or want any additional training, reach out to your NHA representative through your institution to request that be scheduled with someone from our team. It's a good idea to also have a backup proctor, just in case something happens and for some reason you're not able to proctor the scheduled test. You'll want to log into your NHA account and check that upcoming exams field we looked at to be sure the test date is already created. Ideally, candidates should already be starting those applications. Now remember, this is not something that you do, but you'll be able to watch and monitor if they've applied for their exam in that upcoming exams button. This is important to know how many proctors you may need on exam day. As I mentioned earlier, anyone who may be eligible to request a special accommodation should do this now. And this is not your responsibility to submit. You cannot grant or approve special accommodations. This must be submitted by the candidate in advance with adequate documentation, like an IEP or 504. And then it will get reviewed internally here at NHA through our compliance department. Candidates who are approved may need a secondary exam date scheduled or additional needs. They will need to communicate with their school or institution, and it is the institution's responsibility to implement those. So be sure to check with your school or program if there will be any additional needs, a secondary date, another proctor, whatever that might be. 2 weeks, roughly, before you're scheduled to proctor an exam, this is the right time to review the NHA resources, our how-to guides, video walkthroughs, read the proctor handbook and manual so you can address any possible needs or issues within the testing space. That includes making sure that your IT team has reviewed the technical requirements to test and that all computers are equipped. Candidates should be applying or already completed their applications at this point, which you can see again through the exam calendar in the upcoming exams. At this 2-week mark, any accommodations that have been approved are again the institution's, so likely your responsibility to implement. So by this time, candidates should be in communication with NHA and know if they have any accommodations, needing special assistance or a different exam date. If someone does need to reschedule or have an alternative room or a reader or a different setup in that standard exam room procedure, now is the right time to make sure all of that is taken care of. The week before the exam is when registration closes for candidates. Anyone who has not applied before this time will need to have an alternative or additional test date created for them. Based on the now visible roster, check to see if there is a need for any additional proctors. Is there a backup in case something happens? Or if there's more than 25 learners testing, you will need to have a second proctor in the room. This is the right time to look further at the proctor handbook again and manual to make sure that the room will be all ready to handle the exam needs. Again, making sure IT is reviewed, any technical requirements to meet testing environment expectations. Now, the day before the test, you should feel confident that all is ready to go. Make sure the room is set up according to the Proctor handbook. At this time, the Proctor manual will begin to give you directions. So you know the first things to do. Verify that exam roster, which you should now be able to print off on the NHA website, and hold all of the expected candidate names. So review all of those pieces there. If anyone is missing from this list, they didn't apply in time. They will need to have an alternative testing time set up for them at a later date. If there are any discrepancies, for example, someone on the roster who shouldn't be, well, then the institution needs to contact NHA prior to test day to fix it. Refer to our technical requirements in our help center and ensure all computers, including the Proctor station, meets the minimum requirements. Verify that pop-up blockers are turned off on all computers, for example. The Proctor handbook has all of this, including any additional room requirements, such as a working wall clock that is visible to all exam candidates and proctors. Prepare any additional supplies, such as scratch paper, pencils to be readily available to provide on exam day. For example, for auditing purposes, scratch papers need to be numbered following the Proctor manual guidelines. You'll need to review the test plan for the exam you're proctoring so you can relate to candidates how many questions and the length of time for the test. Now, on exam day, prior to test starting, have your Proctor manual nearby, but be sure you know your own login and password. You are probably going to be on a different computer in the testing room and it won't have any of your saved information. So make sure that that's all set up. Check in your Proctor exams field on your login that the exam is listed and available to run. Remember, if the exam status listed in the upcoming exams field says closed or open, then you'll need to contact NHA to get that test finalized. Have your exam roster printed and verify that all learners are eligible to take the test. Confirm them using their proper identification, a government-issued photo ID with their signature and permanent address. Assign the scratch paper following Proctor manual guidelines, and advise that all candidates make sure they know their passwords. They should also use the restroom before the start of the test. So should you, since you're not allowed to leave. So that's a good time to make sure everybody's ready to go, both physically and mentally. So following the Proctor script that's in the Proctor manual, this is to help ensure all goes as smoothly as possible. You want to log in to your NHA exam, have everything ready to identify students as they log in, monitor them at all times during the exam, using both the exam feature and the NHA website, as well as physical observation. Occasionally move around the room during the test. We find that monitoring candidates from the back of the testing room can provide a really good point of view for observing candidate activity, right? Looking around. Once the test is ended, collect all of the scratch paper from all candidates. And if you're the only proctor for the exam, candidates can't leave the room once testing begins except for emergencies. And all candidates need to wait until the exam is completed before leaving. Okay, so I'm going to just take another quick poll here. I'm going to ask you guys a question. Let's see. What do you think? Here we go. What do you think the most common question is on exam day for proctors? When we get phone calls on exam day from a proctor of the options listed here, what do you think is the most common? Go ahead and take a minute, read through those. I know there's a couple there, so take your time, read through them all. We got almost everybody, about 2/3 of you. There we go. Anybody else want to pick one? What do you think? The most common reason for proctors to call NHA. Okay, I'm going to close that up here real quick. All right, so for those of you, if you, let's see, let's just go ahead and post that. There we go. The answer is 45% of the inbound questions on proctoring are related to opening, closing, or adding exam dates. So if you don't see the option to request a new exam feature, then you just need to talk to your institution to get that added to your account. So the most common, 45% is people saying, hey, the exam's closed, we need to add someone, or hey, someone's missing on the roster. And all the things we just talked about that 30-day window will avoid that particular scenario. So if you need to have the request new exam feature added, that's something you may need to have additional permissions for, but it's a really easy process there. Okay, so we're going to dive into some of the most frequent questions or issues that could arise during an exam experience. So these are actual questions and concerns that occur. So let's say I'm supposed to proctor on an exam today, but there are no sessions showing when I click proctor exams. What do I do? Well, check the status. Remember, in that upcoming exams feature, we want to see if it's closed, open, or sent, right? Closed and open statuses aren't going to run on test day. You will need to contact NHA to finalize that test. So this would only occur if something had happened around the registration timeline. For some reason, we would have to manipulate the registration date that could kind of break the automation that makes this happen automatically. So if we follow proper processes, that should not happen. Which should only occur if or when some kind of additional steps had to be taken around registration deadlines. Okay, I can't get past the proctor signature page. What do I do? Well, make sure that you type your full name as it is in your profile, right? That's the thing. So however you wrote it in your original profile, that's what needs to be put there. And then the date format does need to include the full date. So 0101 2022, those kinds of things with those slashes in between. So the full test date does need to be listed. That's the most common reason that wouldn't occur. So when my students log into their exam, they are getting a message that there is no proctor available. Oh, what do I do? Well, this is a timing issue. So you want to make sure that you are logged in to the test before the candidates. So if they've received that message, have them log out and start again once you are logged in and ready. It just means that they were already logged in and we need to kind of refresh that. Not all of my candidates are showing on my proctor page. What do I do? Well, if there's multiple exam sections running on a given day, you just want to go look up at the toggle bar at the top and see if there may be different sections. You can also direct the students to log out and back in again. That could also refresh the screen if that's not the case. So a lot of it just depends on the refreshing of the screen or if you have to toggle between tests. So that's where you would go to look at that. My student's exam stopped because they accidentally clicked outside of the browser. Now, this does happen. Okay, what do? You then click ignore if you know it was a mistake, and then their exam should resume. The student may need to refresh their page and log back in, clicking into their exam on their banner from their home screen. You can then hit resume. So there's just a process there. That's on purpose. We want to capture if anyone is logging out or checking out to try to look up an answer. So that's okay. You're responsible. Part of this is monitoring that process. Something is wrong with my student's computer and they need to log off or change computers. That's okay. Have them log back in as quickly as possible to continue, and you'll be able to hit resume to pick up that exam where they left off. Though time will continue to count down, so we want this to happen as quickly as possible. If they need to switch to a different computer, that's okay. Have them log in as quickly as possible. It's usually a good idea to have a spare computer in the testing lab for just this purpose, but that's the best practice. Just have them pick back up where they left off. Okay, I, as the proctor, had to stop the assessment. Can we restart? Yes, you can. Log back in, have your candidates do the same thing. They will show up under the stopped assessments. Here you want to click no action, then resume to restart those exams where they left off. Closing or abandoning is not what you want. No action. We want to pick it back up where we left off, right? It's not time to close it. No action, and then resume. My candidate has questions to go back and review, but can't get back to them. What do? Well, questions can be flagged, right? And they can use the back arrows, but we want to make sure that they use the back arrows in the exam itself, not in their browser. A back and forward button in the browser is not what we want. Using that rather than within the exam will finalize their exam score. So if they have unanswered questions, those questions will be forfeit. So we recommend that candidates go through all questions to the best of their ability and only return to flagged questions if there is time, and to use the back and forward buttons from within the exam to make sure we don't have any errors. A candidate didn't show up. Can I allow a different person who isn't on the roster to test instead? No. No. Only candidates who are on your roster can test that day. Exam IDs are uniquely tied to each individual. So are the exams themselves, the individual IDs. There's a lot of backend data there. The missing candidate must reschedule their exam. In addition, the candidate who showed up may not even have their registration completed. They'll need to review their exam options to ensure that they are ready to go again for a later date. So in that instance, neither candidate can test at that time. A candidate can't remember their password. What can I do? Well, if you remember, you do have a password reset button. Once you've logged in and begin proctoring, you have the option to initiate that, which you can help by creating that reset code, providing it as needed. Now, this is only applicable for live in-person proctored exams, but it is something you do have the ability to set up, and we do have how-tos to walk you through that process if we need to. Okay, so that was a lot, actually most of our most frequently asked questions. We are going to get to some open Q&A here in a minute, but I wanted to launch one more poll and see, let me just get that out there. Here we go. Based off of our content today, if you feel that you would need additional one-on-one training or information on proctoring, please post that now. We can follow up with you directly and get that scheduled as needed. Take a quick minute and just sign up if that's something that you want, so we can capture your information and somebody will be able to follow up with you to get that scheduled. So take a quick minute, fill that out. Okay, let's just make sure if you want to be on that, now's your chance. So to make sure you get that minute, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Okay. All right, so for those of you who said yes, thank you so much. We will capture that information and somebody will be following up with you to get that scheduled so that we can continue answering any questions that you may have. So thank you all so much for that. For those of you who maybe need to go, can't stick around with us to Q&A, we have been recording. We will be sending out this recording to everybody who registered for today. Now, for those of you who stick with us this long, we are going to be posting some links. Thank you, Lauren, in the chat box there. So there's two different survey links. One of them is more of a personal survey, talking a little bit more about you, your role, your institution. Completing that before December 15th will put you into that $500 gift card raffle. So please do that. Now, the second survey is just unique to you guys in this one group. So those of you who are here with us today, filling that out before tomorrow will put you into a raffle for a $50 gift card. So smaller pool there, higher probability of winning, both good options, especially with the holidays coming up. So please fill those out, copy those links, paste them into something for yourself, fill those out so we can get that captured, and give us some great information about how we can continue to help. All right, so that was the bulk of our information today. Thank you all so much for being here with us. Now, as we have some extra time, we can address any additional questions that may have popped up, or we can stick around and answer questions as needed. So what's been going on? Anything, any conversation?
Not too many. A question about, is this being recorded? And you answered that. And the other one earlier about how to create an exam date. There was one right off the start that was asking if they would receive CEUs for this session.
Is that in the Q&A? Is that something that
It was
Did I
in
post it?
chat.
Okay, go ahead and post that information in the Q&A. We can't offer continuing education credits for this, unfortunately. But if that's something that you absolutely need, documentation of your time to help with maybe professional development hours, we can send you a secondary link for you to fill out a couple questions around, and then you'll be able to get a printable document of your time here with us today. That's something we're looking at for 2023, established for all of our webinars, but as of right now is not kind of an automated process. So if that's something that you need, post that in the Q&A so we can be sure and capture that and get you the information that you require. Great question.
Okay, and then in chat, something just popped up that somebody knows that they're ineligible due to their ownership and instructorship, and they would like to make their administrative assistant their proctor.
Okay.
And they certainly can.
You certainly can. There are walkthroughs and steps depending on your role in your institution. You should have the ability to add and remove users as needed in our how-to space. And I can actually pull up, let me see, make sure that I can show you what that looks like. But most people who are proctors don't necessarily have the option to add and remove staff. So it depends on your role there at the institution. So if you do, you can also check in with your NHA primary contact. If you don't know who that is, put that into that big survey, any of those survey links, and they will follow up with you ASAP. But basically what we want, let me just get into here. You can add and remove those users at your discretion. So we do have how-tos for that, what that looks like. It just kind of depends on your role, again, at your institution. So administrative assistant is ideal kind of individual to run one of those exams. Do we want to see a walkthrough of what that looks like, or did that answer that question, do you think?
I guess it couldn't hurt to show them how to add a
Couldn't hurt.
user.
Yeah, Lakeisha, do you want to is that something that would be helpful for you to see? A little walkthrough of what it looks like to add and remove a user? If you're still in the chat, if you're still with us today. We'll find out. In the interim, are there any other questions posted in Q&A? I see there's a couple of numbers up there. Mary, what's anything we can answer
No,
live?
those are just people asking for a principal certificate for today.
Perfect. We'll capture that for sure and make sure that we get that done. Well, excellent. Well, all right. That is the bulk of our conversation today. Lakeisha, if you do want some additional information, I'm going to stop the recording, but I can show you how to do that if you're sticking around with us here. But thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to stick around for a few more minutes and answer some additional questions as they pop up. But thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful day. We do have the remote testing. And I'm just here. Let me just go over here. So out on our main website, up in our resources space, in our upcoming events. So out on just nhanow.com, upcoming events, this is where we're posting all of our future webinars. So if you scroll down here, you'll see we do have this educator and employer-based webinar series. This is maybe where you registered for today's, I'm not sure, but we do have coming up here some additional sessions, remote testing, new user walkthroughs, reporting walkthroughs. We know this is a busy time of year. There's a lot of content that's going on. So please, if any of these are applicable for you, go ahead and register for them so we'll be able to address your questions based off of the topic that we're addressing. So again, thank you all so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop that recording. Have a great day.